Good evening. My name is Dr. Verna Marina Ehret, and I am the director of the Evelyn Lincoln Institute for Ethics and Society. I want to welcome you to this panel presentation on the moral and ethical issues facing 21st century policing. Thank you all for joining us this evening. ELIES, the Ethics Institute, was established in the fall of 2008 through a generous grant from Emily and John Costigan. Emily Costigan is a 1964 graduate of Mercyhurst College. The Institute is named in honor of her mother, Evelyn Jacobson Lincoln, pictured above here, who graduated from Mercyhurst in 1930. Over the years, the Institute has engaged issues of socially responsible business practices, science and emerging technologies, ecology and sustainability, personal responsibility, and social justice. Before I introduce tonight's panelists, I would like to thank the event staff and the marketing department for all of their assistance in putting together tonight's program. I would also like to thank Mercyhurst University, President Getz, Dean Riley Brown of the Hoffenmeyer College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences for their support for the Institute. Our panelists tonight are Dr. Adam Saylor, Assistant Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Mercyhurst, Chief Dan Spazzarni of the Erie Police Department. On the far end, you can tell which one is the chief, right? On the far end, Mr. David Morris, who's a member of the Strengthening Police and Community Partnerships Council and a staff member at the Erie Charter School. And the second one in here, next to Dr. Saylor, Mr. Michael Outlaw, Community Liaison for the Erie Mayor's Office. And we also want to welcome Mayor Schumber for joining us tonight. All of our panelists tonight have long histories in Erie and the Erie area with a strong commitment to the strength and flourishing of our communities. I will allow each of them to introduce themselves more fully in a moment, but first I'll describe to you the plan for tonight. I will be moderating tonight's panel, and each panelist will give brief remarks individually to set the foundation for our discussion. After that, I'll ask the panelists a series of prearranged questions while all of you think about what you want to ask. Then we will open up the Q&A for questions from the audience. Being mindful of your time, the event will end at 8:30 this evening. So with all of that said, I want to thank all of our panelists for coming tonight, and I will turn it over to Dr. Saylor.
Good evening, everyone. How are you tonight? Good. Appreciate the attendance. So I'm not going to introduce myself too much. I am Dr. Saylor. With that said, I'm coming from a sort of theoretical perspective, but I think this is going to work well to hand it over to practitioners in the field. So I'm going to lead off with my theoretical approach. There are certainly any number of significant moral and ethical issues facing 21st century policing. Relationships with the community, and especially the minority community, are likely to be at the top of any police department's concerns. I chose to speak about a topic that I think is essential to begin addressing and possibly understanding those relationships that police departments have with the communities in general, and especially their communities of color. The issue that I think is fundamental moral and ethical issue for 21st century police departments is to actively consider or actively sort of deny the public's perception of police. Our perceptions drive our reality. The way we see things informs our responses and our daily actions. For example, a sunny 60-degree day after a long snow-filled winter, much like the one we're slogging through right now, would feel like the tropics. I'm sure many of you, and I've seen many of you, break out your shorts, lawn chairs, and sunglasses for an afternoon filled with relaxation, soaking up that sun. However, if we were in the midst of the dog days of summer, when temperatures and humidity create a real oppressive mix of discomfort and discontent, that same sunny 60-degree day might result in a general feeling there's a chill in the air. The sunny 60-degree day did not change, but our perception of it did. For police officers, departments, and the general public, that is no different. In the context of tonight's discussion, I think it is perception that is the most pressing moral and ethical issue facing modern policing. The questions might be, what is the perception of police from the general community? What is the perception of the general community from the perspective of police? And maybe most importantly, should police officers and departments concern themselves with the perception of the community has of them, and if so, why? I'm sure it would not surprise anyone to hear that public perception of law enforcement is complicated. Based on race, gender, political party, age, etc., the perception one might hold of police might differ significantly. For example, confidence in police by racial groups as measured by July 2021 Gallup poll varies greatly. Findings highlighted a continuum of confidence, with the extremes of that continuum being about 56% of white adults from that poll reported they had confidence in police, while only 27% of black adults reported having that same confidence. Overall, the respondents from that July 2021 Gallup poll did indicate higher confidence in police when compared to a similar poll taken just a year prior. But the difference in the increased difference in confidence was only about 2 or 3 percentage points. So it was very slight. Public perceptions of the changes needed in police, based in a 2020 Gallup poll, also found wide-ranging viewpoints. Young people, aged 18 to 34, minority Americans, and individuals that identified as Democrat were all more likely to report that major changes were needed. Older Americans, white Americans, and individuals that identified as Republican were much less likely to say that major changes were needed. All groups noted that some change was needed, but it was the perceptions that drove the respondents' feelings about the extent. Those respondents all live in the same country, were presented with the same questions, and experienced to varying degrees at least the framework of the same law enforcement system. In a lot of ways, the varied experience of law enforcement interactions by the community is the backdrop of the perception discussion, as noted in the incredibly varied responses reported in those previously referenced polls. If we think back to the sunny day example, while respondents might be living in the same country with the same structure of police, their perceptions and their experiences of that law enforcement system drives their reality. So whether based in perception or not, the responses from the public have value and should be actively considered. And so I think the question really is how much police departments should concern themselves with the perceptions. Is it ethical and moral to consider or to ignore public perceptions of law enforcement? Should departments focus on administering the law as it is written and only as it is written? Should police departments balance that administration of law enforcement with a careful consideration of how they are perceived by the public that they are serving and interacting with? Debating these questions brings discretion, often considered the most powerful tool for police, into question. Should departments restrain the use of discretion by officers in an interest to potentially bolster public perception? Or would administering the law as it is written, with limited practice discretion, bolster the public perception? For example, would it be easier for departments to require all officers to follow the letter of the law and give speeding tickets for any infraction over 5 miles per hour over the speed limit? Or would it be better to continue to allow officers to use that discretion in deciding when to give a ticket? The question to consider in this example is how would public perception of police change based on either use of discretion? And again, back to the question at hand, is actively considering perception present an ethical and moral issue for 21st century police departments? And should police departments even be concerned with public perception? Certainly, I would argue that yes, police departments and officers do need to actively consider the perception that the community members have of police. And I would add to that, officers and departments have a responsibility to actively consider all perceptions of all community members. Your perception is your reality, and shared perceptions are shared realities. We all have shared perceptions based on different identities or roles that we have. For example, I likely share the same perceptions that Mercyhurst professors have on a topic that would or did impact Mercyhurst professors. That shared perception or shared reality is developed by my identity or role as a Mercyhurst professor. Shared perceptions and shared realities are an especially 21st century concern given our 24/7 news cycle. We're constantly presented with images and stories that impact both our individual and shared perceptions. But a little bit back to the point, active consideration of a topic is the sort of critical analysis of the why. Why does the perception of legitimacy and confidence in policing vary so greatly? And maybe more importantly, why could I as an officer or we as a department do, what could I as an officer or we as a department do to address any concerns with either? Working to address any deficiencies that the public may have with regards to their positive perceptions of law enforcement is likely to only increase the effectiveness of policing in general. Research indicates that the use of active, community-oriented policing methods, sort of the closest operationalization of concerns for community perception of police, result in a decrease in citizen fear of crime and general perceived disorder, and increases in citizen satisfaction and legitimacy of police in general. The benefits of decreasing public fear of crime and decreasing the general perceived amount of disorder can result in societal benefits like increased business investment, increased property values, more positive educational experiences, and a greater sense of community ownership from community members. How the citizenry thinks of their surroundings is no small metric. In the day-to-day, public members are more likely to be more comfortable calling police with a problem, and more comfortable coming forward and giving police information about observed issues, among many other potential benefits that will only increase the potential efficacy of police work. It would also be important when considering perception to think of the perception officers have, or might have, of the community and its members that the officers or officers serve. A recent letter from Sergeant Jason Collum, a decorated 20-year veteran of the Evansville, Indiana Police Department, and a COPS fellow. COPS is the Community-Oriented Policing Services component of the U.S. Department of Justice, highlights the importance of officer perceptions of their communities and the subsequent impact those perceptions might have on the day-to-day. Sergeant Collum notes that now, more than ever, officers are likely questioning if the public has their back, if it is worth putting themselves in harm's way for a public that might not appreciate their sacrifice, and if, in general, the public simply supports their efforts. Again, perception is driving reality here. Building the positive perception that the public has of officers will eventually only build back or alleviate possible concerns that officers have with regards to their relationship with or within the public. Sergeant Collum notes that supporters of law enforcement have always approached officers and supported their work. By increasing that pool of supporters, by actively addressing the perceptions or the concerns the public has, officers and departments will only increase their own positive perceptions of how the community thinks of them. In a lot of ways, being concerned with increased positive perceptions is like a perpetual motion machine. The benefits will only continue to grow. It is in the day-to-day interactions with the consideration of public perception that officers and departments can build trust and repair frayed relationships with regards to perceptions. The flip side of this argument would be for officers and law enforcement in general to not actively consider the public's perception of the system. Again, the law can be applied as it is written, and perhaps in doing so, law enforcement might increase its efficacy in that manner. I'd also note that related to this point might be a clearer definition of what we expect from police. Police officers have certainly become a catch-all for all issues facing modern society. Police are responsible for those individuals who do break the law, to the individuals who are suffering from mental health concern, to two individuals having an interpersonal dispute, all the way down to the little old lady that heard a bump in the night and all things in between. Those responsibilities are incredibly wide-ranging, complex, and not always related to specifically to the administration of law enforcement. And yet, when any of those issues arise, it is the police that respond. And so should police officers only focus on the law as is written, or should they use their discretion at their disposal to consider how their actions might be perceived by the public they are serving? Perhaps administering the law with no regard to discretion will alleviate varied experiences from community members as well. But a whole other issue arises with that train of thought. Urban centers where minority populations are more likely to live have become over-policed. It would be these same urban centers that would be even more negatively impacted if the letter of law were the driving policy for officers and departments. And to that end, I would certainly argue that practicing discretion and actively considering the perception the public has of police is only going to pay dividends. Ignoring these perceptions is to ignore the concerns, founded or not, of the entire community. As police move forward, these questions and the approaches that law enforcement take should certainly consider public perception. So to bring the example full circle, who wishes that they had put on their shorts and took advantage of a nearly 60-degree day on Monday compared to today's miserable 30 degrees and currently snowing? I don't know about you, 60 degrees felt almost like the tropics to me. And remember, it's still our perception that drives our reality. Chief?
Thank you, Dr. Saylor. None of my remarks will be as prepared as his. Hopefully, though, they'll still have some meaning to you. He had many good points in there. But first off, before we get into this, it's always good to know where the answers are coming from. What's the background of the individual speaking? So as a Mercyhurst graduate, I can tell you that I don't recognize half this campus. So I was very proud of myself finding this building. It's changed much over the last 35 years. I believe I'd be standing in someone's backyard right now if it was back in the mid-80s. I've got 32 years on with the Erie Police Department. I always wanted to be a police officer. I was very lucky to achieve that. I was not an A student. My boss is here. Come on, I passed, okay? Anyways, I always took policing seriously. I went to school, Catholic elementary, Catholic high school, and then here at Mercyhurst. And I want to really express my thanks for the full-rounded perception that I got of policing. Similar classes like this, where you talked about those baseline assumptions that you make and how things matter. It wasn't just about going to the police academy, where when you go to the police academy, here's the law, here's what you do, it's boom, 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 like this. Here, I went to all Catholic schools, but it was here that I started learning about other religions. You know, the wide variety of classes, you know, the humanities, the arts that help you become a person. I would have loved to have been on this stage when I was here. I played with the pep band. I was a trumpet player. I got to go to Europe. I played with my high school band, and I marched in a drum and bugle corps out of Philadelphia. So I don't just have a background as in a sports field, which most people think, you put in a uniform and think police officers were in some type of sports. I was a band nerd. So those perceptions, we just swore in 9 new police officers last week, and very happy to have them on. But on day one that they go out on the street and they put on this blue uniform, they walk out the door, and the first time a member of the public sees them, oh, there's a cop. There's one of those guys who's probably ticketed my neighbor the other day. You know, you get broad painted when you're a police officer sometimes. Oh, that's your traffic cop. You know, everywhere you go, you hear jokes about traffic work. I spent some time in patrol, but I actually spent more of my time in the detective bureau. I supervised major crimes unit. I went and saw a lot of dead bodies. They like my jokes. You guys don't like my jokes so well. During my time with the Erie Police Department, I was fortunate enough to be recognized as a potential future leader, and I was sent to the FBI National Academy class. I spent basically a term there studying police work as a leader of a department, how to lead a department. And I was there with 350 law enforcement professionals from around the country. Every state in the union had future police leaders there, as well as there were 50 international police officers. So every time, you know, we'd have some of our classes and we talk about certain things. Oh yeah, we've got this kind of problem in our city. And you talk to some of the other departments, and some of them were very small departments. We've got 6 officers. And I had people there from New York City and LA, 35,000 officers in New York City. So the perception of policing was very different between those organizations. But then you add the international component. And that was something that through school, and that was the one thing that really caught me off guard when I got there. I wasn't prepared for that. As a matter of fact, my roommate turned out to be a major with the Bolivian National Police. I learned a lot about Bolivia. He was a great guy. They police differently than we do in the United States, but there's some very common themes at the bottom of how they police there as well as how we police here. And I think after the 10 weeks, it was a fantastic program. Only 1% of law enforcement gets to go through that program. It's a shame that there aren't more, but there are other things out there. And you know, if you happen to take the field of law enforcement, it's something that you should strive for, is going to one of those schools like that. You know, the best of the best, as they say. I was fortunate that the mayor chose me as the chief when he became the mayor in 2018. At that time, I had 27 years on the job, experience in most of the units, including 20 years on the SWAT team. But we knew that we had some work to be done. There were some negative things happening in the community with policing that created problems. We knew that we had to address it. We were fortunate enough to have the Department of Justice come in and say, hey, look it, we have this new program. We'd like to pilot it here in Erie. Michael's been the point man for the mayor's office on it. My deputy, Mike Nolan, was the spear for the police department. But the Strengthening Police Community Partnerships program we've been doing, and tomorrow we're going to be doing a large announcement with the DOJ. They're going to reveal the 3-year study, the first 3 years of how the program has gone. And there's a lot of good news in that. But I think it's very important that as a police department, that we partner with the members of the community ongoing. It can't just be, hey, you know, this year we're going to meet a couple times, get together, talk about some things, and sayonara, we're done. It's a long-term commitment. And I think SPCP is something that the city of Erie should have 100 years from now. It should continue that program. I think it's that valuable. The work that the people do is very important to make the whole operation of the city run smooth. I think I'm over my time. I should have maybe prepared my remarks, but thank you for listening to me, and I'll introduce David Morris.
All right, my name is David Morris, born and raised Cleveland, Ohio. So I have a bigger stage as far as being in Erie. I've been here probably about 38 years now. I came here because I'm a basketball player out of Cleveland. I got a scholarship to play for Gannon University, helped lead them to the national championship back in 1987. Went on and played professional basketball overseas for 2 years. After that, came back to school to finish up what I didn't finish. And then fought on the United States martial arts team and traveled all over the world. So a lot of experience doing that, and I'm grateful and I'm thankful. I'm an educator now. I'm an administrator at the Charter School of Excellence, where I came up in Cleveland. Never thought I would be here in this capacity, but I'm definitely grateful. I follow the Lord's plan. Coming up in Cleveland, it was commonplace for us to not associate with police. Being parts of, you know, gangs and things of that nature, it kind of separated. But what separated me from my friends was basketball. That was my ticket. And through that, it gave me an avenue not to be a part of being chased down and, you know, by the police and going through the things that some of my friends were going through, the stigmas, you know, that the police are the worst enemy in a big city. And come to find, you know, my nephews and cousins that were my age, once they grew up, learned that that wasn't true, because they are now leading detectives, chiefs of the city of Erie, not just a small borough, but some of the national news that has come across America. I've watched my cousin on there talking. So it's like now they get it, and they serve the purpose of what being an officer is, and that's protection, giving somebody security, and it took me a while to accept that. You know, coming here from Cleveland, my first day at Gannon University, I'm walking through the corridors outside, and this guy said, "What's up?" And back then in Cleveland, you couldn't say what's up to nobody. That means you want to fight. So I dropped my books. I'm like, what you mean, what's up? So it was the perception. I'm like, what's up with you? And I'm about to go hand in hand. He's like, ho, where you from? And I said, I'm from Cleveland. Where you from? He said, I'm from Bronx, New York. It ain't like that here. You can relax. I was like, for real? And it just be going, he's a part of basketball. He was a part of basketball. I didn't know him. But the perception, as we journeyed on through basketball, some of my biggest, I don't want to say fans, but some of my biggest supporters were some of the officers that would come up to me after the game because they would be watching the game and just be speaking to me. And I'm like, why is he speaking to me? You know, and I'm like, so after a while, it'd be the friendly face that as soon as I walked through the gym, the first person I would meet was security. And I'd be like, hey, how you doing? And then it grew to family. Then it grew to the mayor's den. Then I was like, there's something in this. So I started forming relationships. And it changed my perspective. Not all cops are bad or not all people are bad, because I was living in this bubble like it's me against the world. But I started learning it, as you will, as your journey progress on. But especially for some of the minorities that's out here, you know, we have a job to do, because we're held, our backs are held against the wall twofold. Sometimes we walk through communities and I'm ashamed myself. I'm ashamed of how we respond or how we react to certain situations nationally as well as in our own backyard. So supporting and having support, like I told my kids today in school, I said, I have to go, they asked me what I was working on. I said, I have to go and speak at a college with some of my friends who are police officers. Oh, you a police officer? You a narc? Yup. What else do you want to know? And you still think I'm the coolest person on the planet. So again, change that perspective. So my role now is to educate my students, the people that's around me, you know, just to see me with him, you know, in the community. See me as some of the other officers at their son's games. I have them call them, hey, my son got a game. Hey, let's go right now. They follow my son. My son is the all-time leading scorer in this city's history, and he's playing right now. Right now, I was going to watch a little bit, but I'll wait. He's playing on TV now for Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And I'm proud of that. You know, I got 2 kids that's state championship contenders, and I've had to teach them, you know, about son, my wife, and some of you women may know, my wife babies him beyond measure. So she worries. So every time he's out, where are you at? What are you doing? He'll call me Dad. I got stopped by the police. What was you doing, David? You know, I was speeding. Okay, well, you bite that bullet. You have to deal with the circumstances. If you breaking it, you know how I am with it. So again, just teaching my kids as well as myself, you know, responsibility, duty, character. You know, just be who you are. If you're detained for any reason, don't fight it. That's what I tell my students. Don't fight it, you know, because you're not going to win that situation. You can ask politely, be polite. It's a certain protocol. We need to help them out because they don't know which way things is going to go. They don't know how things are going to transpire, the perception of. But I still, to this day, when I'm not in this city, when I travel, if I see a police car behind me, my heart skip a beat. Because I don't know what that's going to entail, because I've been pulled over for no reason many times. Don't know what that looks like, but it's just embedded in me because I've been to that side of the mountain. And right now, I just live every day highly and do the best that I can to educate everybody else. It's not their fault. They the same as us. Too bad that we have few idiots on forces around the country that do stupid things that make them look bad. Just like we have people in our city that make us look bad for whatever crimes may be committed, we're ashamed of. But that's just my little story. Thank you very much.
All right, no pressure, no pressure, no pressure. All right. Good evening. All right, thank you very much. All right. Thanks to Mercer University for this opportunity to speak tonight. Greatly appreciate it. It is an honor to speak to the youth and share a little bit of my story and hopefully inspire the minds to think critically on issues that impact us here locally, across the world, and on a national level. Before I go into my little spiel, do me a favor. Let's give my boss, Mayor Joseph Schember. Come on, let's clap it up. Listen. This is the most genuine, authentic person I've met. He is not by any means a politician. What he says, he means. What he says behind closed doors, he says publicly. He's on a mission to end racism and prejudice in Pennsylvania. For some, that sounds far-fetched, but we know that we can dismantle the systems of racism. Institutions, policies, interpersonal, and individuals. That's how you dismantle the system. That being said, my parents was born in Mississippi in the Jim Crow era. Who knows what Jim Crow is? Show of hands. All right? My parents had to drink at a colored-only fountain. They couldn't go to school with the white kids. My parents, all right? Just one generation. But they instilled in us, it was 10 of us. We come from a large family, 5 boys and 5 girls. I was the third oldest. And we grew up in the urban core, but they instilled in us the importance of working hard for what you want in life. They told me, son, you can't settle. You can't afford to not wear a dress coat, pull your pants up. They instilled certain things in me, and I passed those down to my 4 kids. I've been married for 18 years, 2 boys, 2 girls. Love them to death, do anything for them. And I'm in part, that's why I'm bald-headed, but nonetheless, love them to death. My perspective is it's unique, right? I grew up in the urban core, public schools. I seen the dope boys on the block. I seen the winos, right? I seen the violence. I witnessed that firsthand. And so when you see those things that appear to be your norm, though it's abnorm, sometimes your mind gets programmed to aspire to become what you see. And so that being the case, I embarked on a journey that was not on the straight and narrow, per se. Finished high school, East High, class of 1994, just told myself, it's all good. Class 1994, East High Warriors. And so upon graduating from high school, went out one night, enjoying myself, had a few drinks, and decided, well, I need some cigarettes. For some reason, now I smoke cigars, but back then I smoked cigarettes, but another conversation. But I used to like beer and cigarettes for some odd reason. So I get in a car, and I go for a drive, and I see these flashing lights, so, I pulled over, of course, and something said, maybe what I saw coming up, you run from the police. So I ran from the police, no lie. And the arresting officers, you would never guess who it was. No lie. Chief Dan Spizzardi arrested me. And So I had that behind the wall experience at 18, and again at 19, behind the wall experience, right? To David Moore's point, when we grew up in urban core, it was, you couldn't be known to associate with the police, right? If you were known to speak to the police, you get shunned from the community as you a narc, you a snitch, God knows what else you are, right? So that was my outlook, anti-police, just anti-police. I had a few run-ins and stops. It was always, from my vantage point, anti-police. Fast forward, again, urban core, sisters, teenage pregnancies, multiple fathers. I had a brother in April 8th of 1999 was murdered in Erie, Pennsylvania. Again, that real life, urban core, life on life terms experience. Had another brother recently was found not guilty, first-degree murder of self-defense. So when you talk about my perspective being unique, I understand both sides of the aisles. Now you compound that with education, higher learning, which really catapulted me into my position today. So with that being said, police and community relations, if nothing else you get tonight, it has to be a partnership. No ifs, ands, buts about it. It has to be a partnership. The days of pointing the finger and, let's come to the table. Let's have dialogue about what can we do together to move the needle. So that's it for my introduction. I will digress, and I look forward to some of these questions. But I'm going to turn around on some of y'all because y'all try to set us up with some of these questions. I'm done.
So thank you all for those introductions. And what we have now is a series of prearranged questions that, as I understand it, are from students.
Yes.
And a number of fairly probing questions. So we'll start with those, and then we'll start with a few of those, and then as you all have questions, we'll open it up to the audience. So we'll start with a big picture question to the entire panel. What do you think the future of policing looks like?
Well, when I started in policing, there was manual typewriters, so there's nowhere to go but forward with technology and policing. Every advance that comes with technology, there'll probably be some type of moral question about it, whether it's the use of drones in a loss of privacy, DNA. How many people have gone to the DNA, had their DNA checked, yet now the police can use that just like you as a member of the public. There's always going to be that community need for protection, yet to balance that protection with individuals' rights. And I think that's just, whatever it is, wherever we go, I can't tell you. I'm still surprised by computers, but I'm sure they'll bring up more problems and questions in the future.
Well, mine is real quick. It's tough to really say what the future is going to be because we all have to be there together. And that's just going to take work, so it's tough.
I'm optimistic about the future policing. Is this on? Can you hear me? All right. So here's why. We have there's a program within the police department. It's called the Police Athletic League. And Sergeant Tom Lennox, he goes to the elementary schools and middle schools, and he's talking to the kids at an early age to show them a different side of the aisle as it pertains to police and law enforcement. And so we're optimistic because we believe programs like that is going to change the outlook on the police departments in the future. So optimistic, hopeful, and we believe that policing will mirror the community that it patrols.
I would add to that Erie has some great programs, whether it's kind of like the approach that I know Michael's very familiar with, Chief is, as well as Mayor Schember, Unified Erie, using data to do sort of policing smarter, understanding the community, not just sort of guessing, but really understanding what the numbers. I know that's sort of a boring approach, but the numbers really don't lie. And so if you use that to drive a response, you have a sort of a rational response. I would also say too, and I think, Chief, recently there was an effort in Erie to kind of reinvigorate like a crisis intervention team where mental health professionals are working in conjunction with police officers. I think those two things are, I think, would be integral in moving policing sort of forward in the future.
So related to that then, how do you think social media affects policing today?
I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to be like a politician. I'm going to redirect the answer. Crisis car. As a student here at Mercyhurst, my instructors were some Erie police officers who worked in the crisis car. It had been developed here in the 1970s. So history repeats itself. It was a great unit, but because of budget cuts, it was cut. And now all of a sudden everybody realizes it's a great idea. So history kind of repeats itself. Social media, pass.
Social media is oftentimes, there's these people who go around different cities and they record their encounters with law enforcement and get all the views, get the money, et cetera, et cetera. So social media impacts policing for the most part in a negative light. You know, honestly speaking, I think there needs to be more intentionality in promoting the good that happens within law enforcement. And so hopefully someone takes on that task to change that narrative. But again, I think right now, when there's blood in the water, sharks will appear oftentimes in our community, in our society. When you see blood and gore and confrontation with law enforcement, that sells. But in essence, it's actually hurting, from my vantage point, policing today.
We want me to respond to that? Of course. I like to have fun in whatever I do, but it has its plus and minus negatives. For the ability to know what's going on, it's a plus. Depending on how it's viewed and who's directing it is the negative, because we don't want to be directed towards a scenario that's maybe true or not true. But to view and see if it's excessive, that's been something that we have been talking about in communities nationwide on those type of police that go too far. And it's an important tool to be used in that manner. That's why, hence, the cameras on police today, because it was a good idea to have some type of record of what's happening. Because I would hear for decades, oh, y'all just blowing smoke. It's not that bad. You shouldn't have resisted. You shouldn't. So it's become a tool. Now we're seeing it's not about resisting all the time. It's not about this or that, but we have to be careful because we want to make sure that the narrator is not leading it to negativity towards police or the other side. Thank you.
I would say in general, kind of going off what David said, the negative, who here gets their media or their news from social media? I'm sure all of, most of the students. And so do you actually read the article? Do you skim the headlines? Skim the headlines? Gives you some information, right? But most of that information is sort of missing context. I think that's the negative. I mean, I think that can filter down obviously to policing, but I think the negative is oftentimes the information we get, and I think David was alluding to that. The information we get is limited. It's also, you know, sort of driven, whatever that information is, by sort of a narrator. And so being cognizant of that and being cognizant of the sort of lack of context, whatever news story that is.
So let me see if there are questions from the audience. I have a massive list of questions here. We can keep going with those, but let me see if there are questions from the audience. In the back.
Well, there's two things that we do. One is we teach the fundamentals. The fundamentals of protecting yourself and the others. And then there's the perception, like we see with social media. And trying to make sure, as a way to lessen the blow of social media, it's now to become more vocal when you're making an arrest or something. You know, don't just say, you're under arrest, get on the ground. Hey, you need to do this, we're going to cuff you. You explain the process so that it's a less scary situation. The bottom line is that when you go out as a police officer, you're going to go into situations that can turn from 0 to 60 miles an hour in a flash. You never know. You're going into people's houses when there's domestics, and or if there's a crime that's called, you're going to go places where people don't want you. There's a chance that somebody's going to go to jail and you're going to ruin their life. And you just never know when that person's going to snap on you. So the fundamentals are always, okay, here's how you have to go in a very careful, measured manner. And we're starting to learn now that some of our mannerisms in protecting ourselves are misconstrued when you see them on video. So some of the way we stance, well, we blade to keep the gun away from the person, keep our strong hand free. We want to keep our partner in our eyesight, even though he's in the next room talking. We're taught to, stand in the doorways and stuff so that you can always keep an eye on your partner. It's a lot of those things that are just basic. The advanced part of it is something that's still developing.
Other questions from the audience before we return to us?
Yes, I know that you had said that compromise is how we get through increasing positive public perception of police. So I guess my question is, how would you recommend that the community works with the police? What kind of programs or things would you recommend to get the community more involved, to want to learn more about the police, to want to increase that positive perception, improving and civic engagement and other things that can come along with it? What would you say for ELIES specifically would be the best route to get the most people involved?
I've got an expert here that's going to answer about some of those programs in just a second. But yes, in the law enforcement world, what we're calling them is non-enforcement contacts. In my younger years on the job, we went out, responded to calls, and we did traffic work. So a lot of our contacts with the public were, you went through a red light, you went through a stop sign, and it was very job-related law enforcing. Well, now it's, okay, carve out a little bit of that time of the day and try to do some positive things too. We talked about the PAL League, and Tom's running a great program, but it's not just one officer. 80 policemen, over half of the, almost half the department is involved in community policing, and they're going to the schools, in the public schools here, and working with the kids after school. So they've moved beyond just that enforcement world, and now they're doing projects with the school. Coffee with the Cop, help me out here, Michael.
Yeah, Coffee with the Cop, Snack Patrol.
Snack Patrol.
Answer the Call series and the Trust Building series.
Trust Building series with this, where we're going into the schools and meeting with small groups of kids and having conversations similar to this, but on their level.
Yeah, so the key word you said was civic and community engagement, right? And so our service is called Civic and Community Engagement. It's 3 prongs: trust building, Snack Patrol, which is the highlight of the summer in Erie, Pennsylvania. We go out in the urban core, high crime areas, and we just, we partner with Bonnell's Ice Cream Collision, give kids ice cream, face painting, the fire hose. It's a beautiful, heartfelt event, and we're always looking for volunteers to help us out with these type initiatives. And so I have some cards here. If you want to get involved, just shoot me an email. We can sit down and talk about ways to get you involved. Right.
And one of the interesting things was early in the career, as a young guy, I wanted to go. Let's go arrest somebody. And you get an older, more mature officer, and he'd want to be at the donut shop, drinking his coffee, sitting there talking to the members of the community. And lo and behold, 30 years later, Coffee with the Cop is now a big program. Yeah. Hey, get out of your cruiser, get in the coffee shop. Where before, we started getting pushed out of the coffee shops, and because the public, the perception was, where do you find a cop? At the donut shop. Well, now, again, history's come around and it's reversed itself.
I saw another hand. Yeah.
Dr. Taylor brought this up earlier, but how do you feel about reallocating police funds to things such as like mental health professionals working with police and like having a team for that?
Well, our crisis car is specifically designed to help with mental health issues. And we've had this discussion right before we started today. We've had it in the past. Some of it, it's called defund the police, or we want mental health counselors going to these calls. But when the realistics come out and you look at it, it's not that the 911 caller is saying, I need a mental health expert here. They're calling saying, hey, there's a fight, there's a disturbance, we need the police here. The police have to come, and they have to be the front line. They got to be able to handle anything that comes at them. This crisis car, when we know that it's specifically somebody having a mental health breakdown, these are going to be officers that are well trained and versed. They're going to work hand in hand with the mental health agencies. We've done it before. We know it worked. We know that the social service people don't want to be the ones getting sent out. Hey, there's a fight. Why don't you go see if that's a mental health problem? No, they want the police to go and get there first. Then, hey, if there's a situation where there's a mental health problem, okay, then call us. We'll be glad to come and help you. But they don't want to be that front line. So you can't defund the police. The police have to be there first. And when it comes to funding, too, it's one of the things that technology. We wouldn't have body cams if we were being defunded, because as the mayor knows, we're spending almost $1.5 million every 5 years as of right starting That's what the cost of our body-worn camera program is. To do 5 years of it is $1.5 million. So defunding the police is going to take away some of those technologies we want. I think that's, I could go on and on, so.
Other questions from the audience? Yeah.
I could give you my perspective. To me, I was always trained that, hey, somebody's always watching you. You're in uniform, you're a police officer, someone's always watching you. And then with security cameras, you're almost always on camera. Well, now everybody carries a camera in their pocket. So to me, being recorded, me personally, doesn't bother me because, hey, they're going to see me doing my job. Now, some officers get a little bit freaked out about that. You know, some people in here don't like to be recorded. You know, your parents ever ask you to smile and take a picture with them? No, Mom, no, Dad. Same effect. But I think that there's no problem with citizens recording the police. You have to weigh your own safety in because you don't know what the officer, you're just saying, boy, that guy just walking down the street and these cops just jumped out of their car, ran up to him, tackled him, threw the cuffs on him. He didn't do anything. What did he do around the corner that you didn't see? So you have to keep yourself safe. Again, we tell all the officers, expect to be recorded everything you do out there. You know, it goes to that personal ethics that, you know, you always do what's right on camera, so always expect to be on camera.
There was a question in the back. Yeah. Go.
I think I got most of it. You're fading a little bit, but I think I got the idea here. And, you know, what we tell our officers, and I tell my staff all the time, is that we have to remember that we're the professional. Okay, we have to set the example. We have to go out there and earn people's respect. It's difficult because sometimes, you know, you get absolutely no respect. You get downright disrespected, you know, spit on, hit. You still have to be the professional in the situation. But I think it's through the relationships of what we're doing with this SPCP Council, the PAL program, the non-enforcement contacts. You know, have you ever talked to a police officer just in passing, or has a police officer in passing ever said anything to you? How you doing? How's your day going? You know, I got David here in the 80s beating Mercyhurst up. So you're not exactly my friend. Then his son, you know, starts beating up on my old high school and kicking him out of the state playoffs. but we still get along, you know. Even a guy named Outlaw, that I never did a darn thing wrong to him, but boy, he just wouldn't listen when I told him to stop. And he made me run for blocks. Thank God I was much thinner back in those days. But, you know, it's a two-way street how people are. Policemen aren't perfect. They're going to make mistakes. They're, you know, depending on the day, you know, maybe they came from a really bad call just prior to this. And not to make excuses, but it's the same thing in your lives. I might encounter you on your worst day. And you might encounter me on a day that's been going pretty bad. When our police officers go out and work a shift, you don't know what kind of calls they've been on, because they'll go on multiple calls throughout the course of the shift. I've gone on shifts where I've seen multiple dead bodies. I've gone on shifts where I've seen children assaulted by their parents. I've gone to work when I've had bad things happen at home. And sometimes we all have those days. But it's important, and coming from the leader of the department down, we are professionals, and we need to be the better person here all the time. But take some of that into consideration when you judge that officer in that 3-second video. Again, what was the bigger picture? What happened before this?
I think it's key also, pick up on what Chief Dan just said, like, we have to begin to change our outlook within the urban core, right, on, you know, that anti-police ideology. And we was at East Middle School last week, and one of the questions we asked the kids were, how does hip-hop impact your outlook on law enforcement, right? Because a lot of the rappers, as we know, NBA Youngboy, Yo God, you name them, it's like F the police, anti-police, et cetera, so that is being programmed into the kid's mind, right? And oftentimes that plays out in real life, you know, when it, you know, confront a police officer. So we have to, as a community, I completely agree with Chief Dan. Officers should be professional at all times. Now, on the flip side of that coin, we as a community, we have to do a better job at showing that same respect. A part of the SPCP goals is respect for and from law enforcement, right? Because that goes a long way. And I think if we as a community take ownership, right, and begin to instill those different lessons into the younger generations, and even into some of the quote-unquote OGs, like, let them change their narrative, I think we'll see a more cohesive relationship between the police and the community.
Yeah, I would add to that too, not for either the community or police to fall into that sort of highly politicized narrative of being sort of a war on crime, right? You know, you see that from a politicized approach that there's this war out there. And I think it feeds in a lot of what you're saying is community members feeling like, you know, maybe they're kind of insurgents, part of this war, and police feeling like they're, you know, fighting this war as opposed to us versus them, or as opposed to working together, because that creates that us versus them. And so I think all around, if everyone kind of took a step back and as much as we can, it's difficult, certainly, but as much as we can to step away from, you know, that of which we're being fed a lot of times by the media, right? Sort of to step back from that highly politicized approach to really anything. But I think for crime, it's kind of that approach of there's a war out there.
Can you say that a little bit louder? Yeah, thanks.
So if I heard you correctly, inequalities determines people's experiences. And based on those experiences, encounters with law enforcement varies. It could be a positive encounter, it could be a deadly encounter, or it could be a nice encounter. I completely agree, right? They're systemic inequalities perpetrates the disparities that exist within the marginalized communities. Hands down, no doubt, we're on the same page. That being the case, that's why programs are so important and policy changes are so important to kind of even that playing field out, right? And Chief Dan can speak more too about the policies that his department adheres to, but just from a community side, again, grew up in the urban core, right? The challenge is forcing yourself to go against what you were brought up in and what you see. Even though it's abnormal, even though like my experience seeing what I saw, that's abnormal. No child should have to live through those moments. However, that shaped my outlook and my responses to law enforcement. So when we come around with these programs and we go back to those urban core, we're hoping, even though we know there's inequalities, disparities, our hope is we're showing a new way, a new partnership to doing things, and hopefully that changes some of the, at least the relational narratives. Now, you're talking about programs and things of that nature. That's a different side of the aisle. But at least from what we're doing from a grassroots, frontline approach, we believe that we've been impactful thus far.
I would add to what Michael said, and to Michael's example of being pulled over by Chief Spizzarni. You all have the opportunity now that I think any generation before you didn't have, to educate yourself and to continue to educate yourself. So what I mean by that is the opportunity to really fully understand and empathize with someone else's perception. And so maybe understanding why Michael would run that night, right? Why it clicked in his mind of there's a police that's pulling me over, and even though maybe I haven't done anything very serious, I just feel this need to run. And so why is there that feeling, right? So take the responsibility on yourselves and on ourselves to educate yourself better, but also beyond that is also understanding what your implicit biases are, right? Because that also allows us to understand better why someone is perceiving a situation that way. So whether it's education, Michael's mentioned systematic approaches to racism, understanding that, not sort of turning off and getting defensive at terms that relate to systematic approaches to racism, and then also understanding your own implicit biases better. Because I think if we do those things, we have more empathy towards other individuals to understand, again, why Michael may run or why someone else may, to David's point, your heart skips a beat when you get pulled over. Certainly, I've been pulled over once or twice, and my heart skipped a beat. But I know as a white man, the beat that my heart skips would have certainly been significantly different than why David skipped. But if we understand that, then I think we can understand the difference in the perceptions and then the realities of individuals as well.
I mean, I think like that's what she's identifying, is that different experiences for different individuals encounters with the police. But you mentioned your heart skipping a beat. David's heart skips a beat. Here's what's very interesting is that, and I'm not going to go too far off the questions, but when a police officer stops a person of color, their likelihood to survive that encounter is great, right? If they stop a white man or a white person, their likelihood to survive that encounter lessens. There is data out there, research it, and come back and email me, but I don't know why that dynamic is there, but it is there.
I get to hear my boss talk a lot about this, about seeing a police car, and he gets nervous. He tells the public about that all the time. He sees a police car behind him, he pumps the brakes. He's got a police car. Well, happens to me too. I see a police car in my rearview mirror, especially when I'm outside the city of Erie. I get nervous. I'm double check my speed. I slow down. But isn't that what we're all doing? Is because they're there to enforce the law, and so we're all thinking they're looking at me. Am I speeding? You know, it's not. Half the days, half the people now, you can't tell with the cars with the tinted windows who's even driving it. You know, a lot of times you don't know who that driver is until you pull up to it. So, but then right away, sometimes you're just pulling me over because I'm black. I didn't know you were black when I saw the car go by. But that's part of that training. You got to keep yourself, okay, just calm the situation down. Well, this is a traffic stop solely because of this infraction here. Half the time anymore, policemen, I probably shouldn't say this, don't want to be out there writing tickets. It's not really what they want to do, okay? They'll do it if they have to, or if it's an egregious mistake. But for the most part, a polite response. You know what, officer, I'm sorry, I may have been going a little over the speed limit. A lot of times, it's just a warning. But people get so afraid of what's going to happen. Doesn't happen all the time. I've gotten pulled over and cited before I was on the job. My first recommendation is just to be yourself, be calm about it, be polite. Don't argue that I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. Well, you don't know what the officer saw, what his perception was. Maybe his only reason to pull you over was because your brake lights are out. So maybe it was just a warning for equipment failure. He's going to write you a 5-day notice. Hey, go get this fixed in 5 days and you're done. I've had people jump. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't pulling you over for speeding. I think the first thing is to calm down. You know, second, I've heard groups out there that go and they talk about, you know your rights on a traffic stop. Well, it's not a debate on a traffic stop, or during an arrest for that matter. If an officer has reason to stop you and he gives you a ticket, or if he has reason to arrest you, there's no debate going on. So you let the process go through, because there are videos out there and people are seeing everything. And if the officer is doing it wrong, they'll get called for it. Or you might just find out that, your turn signal wasn't working. Can you just make sure you get it fixed? Don't always assume just because the police officer's stopping you, he wants to write a ticket, or he's out to be a mean guy at that point. I guess you just treat him like, you know, it's a neighbor or somebody you haven't seen in a while. Or, hi officer, I've never met you before. What's up? What happened? You know, in a way, it's the way we approach people. Just like in an encounter, if I met you in the hallway here, hey, what's your name? Or, hey, how you doing? How are your classes here? You know, sometimes it's that perception people have.
So in part, I think you answered your own question. And what could be beneficial to this process is social media, right? Maybe having these educational videos on what to do during a traffic stop, et cetera, could be a tool, to kind of like as a de-stressor when individuals are pulled over by law enforcement.
I would add one thing. That's why I noted shared experiences, though. So Michael noted social media and sort of the shared experience of, and that's why I noted sort of like maybe why my heart skips a beat slightly different than why David's might have skipped a beat, right? My shared experience would have been, I'm nervous, what did I do? I'm a little bit jittery, but the shared experience of someone of color, a black man being pulled over, is as much different than mine, right? And so that shared experience is maybe something that they or their friends haven't directly experienced, but seeing images in the media and in social media. And so being cognizant, that's why I noted officers, current and future officers, being cognizant of those shared experiences. Why, this young black man is jittery is because he's concerned that maybe just recently, last week, he saw a national news article where a young black man like himself was just pulled over and it resulted in that person's death. And so being cognizant of those shared experiences, that it's not that person, but their reality is sort of that shared reality. And why they're being jittery is different than why maybe a young white man is being jittery are different. And so that's why I noted specifically the importance of that shared experience as a shared reality.
You're talking heavy, Doc, because to his point, not to belabor it, but when the trauma happens on a national level, it trickles down in the psyches here locally, right? And so that's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually a great way to summarize that. Is it's not the shared experience. It is a shared experience. It becomes a shared reality, but it's also the shared trauma. And that trickles down. And for, again, active police officers, but also future officers, to understand and be cognizant of that point.
We haven't really approached this subject that much of the prevalence of guns among civilians. I wonder how much we normalize this style of policing in this country because it's so easy to get a gun. You can't really compare to any country in the world how many civilians carry guns. It makes everyday encounters between individuals or individuals and law enforcement. It brings a different edge to that. So can you just kind of speak to the gun culture, what greater regulation could mean for different ways of approaching policing?
I'll start briefly. The gun culture, I think in association with that is sort of a culture of being like overly masculine. I think sometimes how that can trickle into policing is more of like a warrior mentality as opposed to like a guardian mentality. I know it doesn't exactly answer your question specifically, but I think the gun culture itself is sort of like an overly masculine culture. And I think that has a lot of ramifications for policing from both standpoints.
We've had issues with we're an open carry state, Pennsylvania. So if you're legally able to possess a weapon, you can carry it in the open. But you can't take it into a car and you can't wear a coat over it and conceal it. The gun rights people in Pennsylvania have argued the Constitution says we can carry a weapon anytime, anywhere. The city, years ago, the administration, back in the, I think it was in the 90s, didn't want guns in Perry Square, and they wrote a law that you can't carry them there. And it got overturned. And now we're having these bigger gun rallies where, hey, everybody bring your gun out. Let's go have a party in the park to show that we're Americans, we can carry our guns. From a police perspective, man, it's nerve-wracking. I carry a gun to protect myself and to protect you because I'm sworn to do that. I'm trained to do that. you've got citizens out carrying guns that have no training, no idea of proper handling. It's a scary situation when it comes up. Honestly, I prefer that we have a little bit more control over stuff like that. It's not to say that people can't have guns. You know, I did 20 years in SWAT. I didn't mind going to a range and practicing. It was actually kind of fun, some of the stuff we did. But again, under a professional's training and stuff, whereas anybody carrying a gun, we've seen a few situations. Even store owners are allowed to have a gun in their store. Well, somebody shoplifted, they're running down the street, so they think they're just going to go out and start shooting, not realizing that those bullets could hit anyone in the backdrop. There's laws to be learned. There's safe handling procedures to be taken care of. My biggest problem with these people are so important that they got to carry a gun around with them is they come home at night and I'm going to put it under the seat in the car, or I'm going to put it in the center console, and I'm going to walk in the house and, oh yeah, you forgot to lock your car doors. We get most of our guns that come out on the street are stolen because the owner didn't properly secure it. I mean, that's just, it makes no sense. You won't find my gun left in a car, ever. Even if the car is locked. Unless there's a safe in the car, my gun doesn't stay in the car. And I don't understand why people take them so lightly when it's such a dangerous weapon.
I would add one more thing to that. I'm a sportsman. I engage in hunting and shooting activities, and I was always driven. I have pistols at home. I lock them up and everything. But I was always driven by something, a good piece of advice that my dad actually told me. He said, with regards to sort of like carrying and the idea of protection, a pistol's more than likely going to lead to nothing but trouble. Like Chief Spizzarni said, there are individuals that do carry guns for your protection. I don't totally disagree with the idea of carrying, but I think it should come with significant training. But I think inevitably, I always kind of fall back to the idea that in most situations, if you need to rely on a pistol and you're not highly trained, you're not an officer, it's probably just going to get you into more trouble and probably the people around you more trouble than it's going to solve.
Let me say this. Some communities, there's so much gang activity in those communities, and I'm not validating or saying gang activity is the right thing to do, but some communities, if they don't have a gun, they don't survive within those communities.
So let me ask one final question as we wrap up this evening. Do you think that officers should be required to complete annual ethics or implicit bias training?
Done. Yes, we require it. I'd like to brag about the Erie Police Department. Okay, we're 175, almost 175 years old. A lot of departments aren't that old. They're not as large as we are. We're no New York City 35,000. We're 175. But for Northwest Pennsylvania, for our size city, we've got a very good police department. Give me a second. One of the things that we do have is a training unit, and a lot of smaller departments can't afford to have a police officer sit behind a desk all day. We do, and he doesn't sit behind a desk. He goes to train. He goes to different events, and he brings back that information to train the department. In Pennsylvania, police officers were required to go to school for 2 days. Okay, our department requires that you go to your state training for 2, and you go to the department training for 6. So we're getting 8 days of training, much more than a typical police department. But we bring in various speakers, whether it's the district attorney's office, social service agencies, mental health services. They come in and they train our officers. We've had day-long trainings with race relations and implicit bias. I mean, these are things that we are doing, and it's funny why so many people say, why don't you guys do this? We do. But I could say this, at least if you're here in Erie, your officers are well trained and probably better trained than most officers in Pennsylvania.
Well, I want to thank our panelists for this evening for all of their insights. So, let's go. And I want to thank all of you for coming this evening and the wonderful questions that you've been asking. We have a lot more, so please do continue to engage these questions. And this panel was recorded. It will be available for you to view later through the ELIES website. We also have another speaker coming with the Mission Office and Sustainability for Earth Day on sustainable manufacturing. So thank you all for coming this evening. Have a wonderful night.